Hey guys, welcome back to Human Condition. This video is another video on our biology series. This one is genetic cloning ethical? This is a pretty intense one. Basically in this video we're talking about 3 types of genetic cloning and how it's been used so far and the possibility in the far future if genetic cloning could ever be possible on humans, which I know is kind of intense. But yeah. There's 3 types of cloning: gene cloning, therapeutic cloning, and reproductive cloning. And all the current types of cloning that so far are not that aren't full human cloning are somewhat noble, or done for somewhat noble reasons. However, there are still some ethical concerns with it that we'll talk about a little bit, and then we'll get into the big, very ethical, concerning human cloning, and if that's possible, and if the cool aspects of it and the negative aspects of it. So yeah, gene cloning. Gene cloning is taking a specific gene, recreating it. This is probably done. Recreating is probably done by putting the specific gene in DNA, replicating it, and putting it in a host cell, such as like bacteria. And this is primarily used to study DNA genes, sometimes for therapeutic proteins and genetic engineering. That part might be a little controversial, ethically questionable. I think it's somewhat ethically questionable as well, because I don't think we as people are meant to genetically alter even though it's kind of cool, genetically alter our genes. I don't think we're supposed to do that, but yeah, that's my opinion. I don't know. I don't think we're supposed to do that. But that being said, therapeutic cloning is more. When I was reading it, it sounded pretty brutal, and this one might be more ethically questionable than gene cloning. Therapeutic cloning but it's used for very noble causes. So the question, I guess, is a philosophy question: do the means justify the ends? Wait a minute. The ends justify the means. What am I saying? What am I talking about? Do the ends justify the means? I think the means always justify the ends, but the ends don't always justify the means, the way you do things. So therapeutic cloning, it's used to treat very harsh conditions that a lot of people suffer from. It's Parkinson's and diabetes. So it said something about you grow an embryo, and before it gets to a certain stage of development, take the cells from it. And that sounded kind of brutal to me. However, that's what therapeutic, and that one I might not 100%, but I guess it's tough because it's for very strong conditions. So it's like, ethically, that's like a very tough ethical question. Maybe I should save that, my opinion, for a philosophical video. But anyway, it's gathering the stem cells from this embryo before it's fully developed. I think I read it correctly, which sounded kind of brutal, but using the stem cells to fix damaged cells in people who suffer from Parkinson's and who have diabetes, which in a way that is a noble cause, obviously, to help them with that condition. So I'll leave that up to your opinion. And the third one is reproductive cloning. The idea, and this is used on animals, and it's for de-extinction of animals, helping these animals that are going to extinction, and helping agriculture. I think that's like out of all these, they're all kind of ethically questionable. But the reproductive cloning for animals, I feel like that's a very wholesome. Well, actually, balls. The therapeutic cloning is very wholesome as well. I think the reproductive cloning for animals, helping them fight de-extinction, not being extinct, and agriculture, is like the least ethically questionable out of the 3, but they're all somewhat ethically questionable. So I think that's really wholesome, trying to help the poor animals from extinction. But again, it's also very wholesome, therapeutic. The goal, at least, is wholesome for therapeutic The means, not necessarily, but the goal for therapeutic cloning is very wholesome as well. It's helping people with crippling diseases, which is very important. Very, very important. That being said, reproductive cloning in humans, this last section of this video, is it ethical? Now, like this, I started thinking about this topic recently when I was playing a game, pretty lit game. It's called Fallout 4, and where synths are genetic clones. And I was like, be pretty fire to have a genetic clone myself, like you see in the sci-fi movies, the ones who like do school and work for you and like do things for you. That'd be pretty fire. But then I realized, obviously a genetic clone has to have its own freedom, because it's kind of cruel to make someone else do your bidding, it's pretty brutal. And the second thing is genetic clones, not allowed, if they were possible in humans, the main problem is, well, not the main problem, but the main thing is that they'll start as like a child, like a baby, and they'll grow up. So it takes a while for them to get to the state similar to you. But they're kind of like, if you think about it, it's just a genetic clone is kind of just like an identical twin, because identical twins share 100% DNA, and so would an identical clone. So ethically, it's not like, and it's still pretty bad, I understand, but like it's not like similar to identical twins, but identical twins, I guess, are letting nature and life take its course, whereas you shouldn't try to control that type of thing. But it is cool. I was cool to think about it, because like if you had a kid, genetic clone, right? You'd be like 100% genetics. You share 100% genetics with them. So it'd be like, you'll understand them more, kind of like identical twins do with each other, which is pretty wholesome. You'll understand them more than anyone else could, because you kind of are very similar to them. However, obviously, personalities be a little different if you have different life experiences, but in a way it's also kind of cool, because even if they're completely different from you, personality-wise, you'll be like, oh, if I had those same life experiences, I'm almost like 100%, well, not 100%, would turn out that way. So you kind of understand them, because you're like, whereas another person, if you had those exact same life experiences, you might not turn out the same way. With identical twin, you'll be like, oh, maybe if I had those same, I'm not identical twin, but a genetic clone, even though they're so different from me, even if I had those life experiences, I'd probably turn out the same way as my kid. It's kind of crazy. However, the ethical concerns obviously be, the kid would always feel probably bad, potentially, about having to be a clone. You shouldn't, sometimes in life, you shouldn't try to control everything. Like when it gets to genetics, it's putting yourself at a higher place that you probably shouldn't put yourself, in my opinion. And the main thing, I was researching this, is what is the main thing holding back genetic cloning? It's not technology, it's more the ethical part. Because technologically, we probably could actually do it, since we already clone animals. However, it's the ethical part of free will, autonomy, and becoming too controlling as people. And I kind of understand why that's unethical. Because for me personally, I still respect and love all people. I'm religious, like I've talked about in my videos, and I believe in God, and I feel like we're not meant to control all aspects of life. And genetic cloning and designing genes of people, even though it's really cool and interesting, I don't think it's in our role in life. It's in my opinion, his decision to design how we are and make people the way they are, not our way, our decision, but I respect and love all people. And I think that's the main concern, that is why genetic cloning hasn't progressed for people. But yeah, so in conclusion, is genetic cloning ethical, or is gene cloning ethical? Depends on what type of cloning. I think the most ethical is probably reproductive in animals. However, it's still unethical in some ways. because you're still messing with genes. For me personally, therapeutic cloning seems pretty brutal. However, it's really good. It's really for a noble cause, which is really wholesome. The cause itself is. And gene cloning and editing genes is like kind of like in between the two extremes, and not extremely unethical, but not really ethical either. And then human cloning, probably the second to most unethical when it comes to cloning, in my opinion. But I thought this was a pretty interesting video. I hope you guys liked this video. As always, thank you guys again for watching. Like and subscribe if you want. I love you guys, and I'll see you next one.